Hello and welcome everyone for joining us for our third principle in the Anti-Racist Community Engagement Principles and Practices book. Today, we are joined by Aldo and Cindy, who are going to lead the discussion on developing strategies for intentional anti-racist learning in courses via anti-racist learning goals, course content, policies, and assessment. So the name of this was Developing Anti-Racist Learning in Course Design. I know that you are here to hear from them, and we at Campus Compact are excited that they are here to share their knowledge with us. So without any further ado, because I really want to get into this topic and learn with and from my colleagues, I'm going to turn it over to our two presenters.
Good afternoon. So glad to have everyone here. Samaldo Garcia Guevara, Professor of History at Worcester State University and also Chair of Interdisciplinary Studies at Worcester State, where I've been for 18 years. And I have been working on sort of local and global community engagement for most of that time.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cindy Vincent. I'm Associate Professor of Media and Communication at Salem State University. I've also been doing community engaged work for quite some time. I'm going to pass it over to Aldo so I can fix my Wi-Fi connection real quick, though.
All right. Well, sounds good. Well, we're going to take some time today. The bulk of our time today will be having y'all think about how to implement Principle 3, which we'll be talking about today, which reflected the section in which me and Cindy were co-editors with on the book. But before we jump into letting y'all sort of grapple with the principles and how they might apply to your own coursework and in your own universities, I want to take time to talk about them a little bit and introduce the book. And so I wanted to say that, the book itself, right, begins and is centered on, guided by a set of four principles for anti-racist community engagement. And these principles, when we developed them, are a result of years of work by a large team. We were two of those members, but there were many, scores of folks who were involved in different ways, who engaged in a multi-year effort to develop them, building on an exhaustive literature review and taking into account voices from numerous students, faculty, staff, and community members across multiple communities and campuses. The principles address the persistence of racism, individual and structural, in our institutions and communities, and how we need to acknowledge and then work to address it. And the responses are many, from understanding our positionality, employing critical reflection, working with communities and avoiding white saviorism, to creating compassionate and reflective classrooms, valuing the cultural wealth of our students and their communities, and involved addressing all these different relationships, right, between and among community partners, folks at universities and within universities. Well, these principles are interwoven, and you'll have a chance to take a look at them when we share them. For those who haven't already, they took discrete forms. And so today, as I mentioned before, we'll be looking at the third principle on intentional learning and course design to think about our own courses, institutions, and relationships today. So just a few more things about the development of the book before I talk and address the principle itself. So in the book, each section, right, so after we developed the four principles, each section then was co-edited by pairs, and we had one BIPOC and one white editor. And as a group, right, we were committed to really highlighting, so as we were evaluating which examples we would include in the book, we were committed to highlighting collaboration and co-authorship, diversity in as many forms as possible, decisions that were made that were that had very, very obvious and apparent, right, anti-racist values. And we received many examples. I do have to say, during some of the dark days following, so 2020, the the examples, being able to read these examples really heartened me and brought some light into some dark days. So the 5 that ultimately made it into this section are terrific examples of these principles and values and goals. So I'm so glad to take a look. Unfortunately, as I talk, I can't look at where everyone is from, but folks coming from all sorts of different places. So I'm going to take a moment and share just on the screen, Principle 3 real quickly, and I'll tell you just a few kind of summary of that principle. Let me make sure I can do that. All right, so Principle 3, just focused on course goals, content, policies, and assessment. The course content, right, should of course address non-majority voices and decentered whiteness. The courses themselves, though, in addition to the content itself, the courses themselves should be restructured to equip the students to understand the communities in which they will work and with which they will work. And the faculty will provide opportunities to co-create the syllabus with community members. With highlighting all of these voices, the voices of community members and students, right, and valuing their cultural wealth, contributions, and knowledge production. And always keeping in mind, right, trauma-informed perspectives and pedagogical practices, and diverse forms of assessment that allow these many assets, voices, and languages to be valued. The bulk of the book is a series of examples that demonstrates the ways that these principles can be applied, organized around a presentation of the case or the question, right, the problem, issue, or context, then the practices to address the practices that were addressed in response, and the connection to how this can lead to curricular, pedagogical, and/or community change. So Cindy will now address an example from that chapter.
Thanks, Aldo. Yeah. So again, thank you everyone for joining our workshop today. So the case study I'm going to dive into is just one example from our chapter, focusing again on developing anti-racist learning goals, content policies, and assessment. And this case study comes out of Philadelphia, out of Swarthmore College. And so Swarthmore is a small liberal arts college outside of Philly. And this particular case study was a collaboration between the Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility, the Swarthmore College Libraries, and local community members. And so at the heart of this collaboration was really about people coming together and connecting to address and bring together people who had been resettled into the community in Philadelphia from other places around the globe. And it was really to address issues of xenophobia and racism and discrimination. And so through this collaboration, they created the Friends, Peace, and Sanctuary Project, which is a book arts project aimed to facilitate a greater sense of empathy for and belonging among the resettled community in Philly. So the project addresses stereotypes and misconceptions to reduce racism and xenophobia on campus and in surrounding communities. The project was designed to prioritize agency, spark creativity, and ultimately celebrate the resettled individuals from Syria and Iraq in the local community. So just a quick overview of what they were able to accomplish through this collaboration, which I should actually point out, the authors are Katie Price and Yarub Al-Abedi. And Katie is a professor at Swarthmore College, and Yarub is a community member. And so one of the nice things about this book is that we intentionally asked for, solicited, and received case studies and practices that were co-written and co-developed by community members and people involved in academic institutions. So unlike many of the books out there that are strictly from an academic perspective, we really were looking at how communities are addressing these problems themselves and partnering with institutions to try and leverage institutional resources to create these projects. And so a quick overview. Over the course of 2 years, the FPS hosted over 20 bookmaking workshops, launched 5 exhibitions, created a fully bilingual Arabic and English catalog, supported events designed by project collaborators, and connected collaborators with art classes, skill shares, and other opportunities across Philadelphia. And the general idea behind the Book Arts project is what they call Sticky Family. And the title of this project is Sticky Family and the Transformative Power of Making Together. And so the general idea behind Sticky Family was to bring a group of people together to imagine what the world would look like if they quite literally had to stick together despite differences in nationality, religion, culture. Participants worked together to co-create a fantastical story that imagines a notion of family that is inclusive beyond biological, temporal, and cultural boundaries and integrates traditionally marginalized perspectives. And so we really enjoyed reading the abstract that they submitted and working with the authors to fully develop this into one of the chapters in this book, primarily because they centered anti-racist community engaged principles within the work that they were doing with their community partners. And so again, like a lot of the work out there, a lot of the like historical work out there around service learning or community engagement, where some of the work was done to communities, we intentionally chose collaborations that worked with communities, not on communities. And so some of the anti-racist community engaged practices that were embedded showed themselves in a couple different ways. First is by preliminarily engaging with students and community partners separately. That helped to set expectations and answer questions and concerns that one or the other may have about working in that collaboration with each other. They created a series of workshops to be able to create the book. And so the workshops inevitably created connections and a sense of equal belonging. It involved faculty, students, and community members co-creating the final story in a fictional universe. And it ended by coming together as a whole group to connect all the stories and all the characters. The story that was ultimately created was simultaneously all of theirs and none of theirs. Right? Nobody had sole ownership over this story, which is also a nice thing. It speaks to our problematic history in academia of academics going out and taking stories from local communities. This one instead was co-creating stories with local communities where the communities got to keep that story, right? It wasn't stored away in the ivory tower. And lastly, they held a public event to celebrate the published book, which again brought the issue at hand, discrimination and xenophobia, to the forefront of the local community to celebrate diversity and to celebrate the Anti-Racist Community Engaged project. And so ultimately, some of the outcomes of this project were multifold. At the university itself, the Swarthmore Arabic Department planned to implement a regular course that allows students and community partners to continue expanding on the Sticky Family project through additional volumes. In 2022, there was the launch of the Engaged Humanities Studio, which supports 5 campus community projects each year that share the values that inform Sticky Family. And so some of these values are things like increasing campus community and cross-cultural connections, prioritizing community and cultural knowledge, working together in transformational ways, and critically examining processes, particularly in how they're working together. Again, when we're thinking about institutional and community collaborations, how can we do that in an equitable way where the academics aren't sort of being held up on a pedestal over community partners and knowledge and voices and perspectives, right? And then lastly, the project resulted in the creation of the Friends, Peace, and Sanctuary Journal, the only Arabic English journal in Philadelphia, which was a huge accomplishment for the group. And that's our case study.
All right, terrific. Thank you, Cindy. So that's our introduction, sort of the book, the principles overall, and then one of the examples, right, that highlights the ways that the set of authors were able to implement Principle 3 in their work. And so what we're hoping to do with most of our remaining time is to ask you to think about and reflect on how you might think about these questions and these principles and the elements of the principles in your own work and in your own courses. And so how we're going to structure the next bit of the workshop is to give you about 5-ish minutes, right, to kind of think individually about the principle itself. I'll put it up, share the screen, and as well as share all of the principles here in the chat, right? So you can look at all of them. We'll be focusing on principle 3, but you're welcome to look at them all, and certainly you'll see that there's some overlap between them. And then think about the sort of these questions. So what are you doing currently in relation to the principle in your course? What would you like to be doing or doing more effectively than you do now in relation to this principle? And what are some brief actions that you can take that will jumpstart the work? So again, we'll have you all individually reflect upon that for 5-ish minutes, and then we'll put folks into small groups to discuss. And we'll be popping through the small groups, facilitating discussion, and then we'll come back out. We'll do that for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then Cindy, you said 15, right? We're going to be on the upper end depending on how time goes, and then we'll share back out for the whole group.
I'd love to, although I'd also like to
Mhm.
be flexible in that questioning. So the first
Mm.
question is asking how you would implement principle 3 within your course. I'm noticing in the chat that quite a few of you are not maybe in an instructional role. You might be with the Center for Civic Engagement or some other capacity like that. So I would encourage you guys to think about anti-racist community engagement, particularly principle 3, which does have an inherent focus on course learning and curriculum design. But think about that across your programmatic learning objectives and your programmatic initiatives that would involve curriculum design or learning objectives or things like that.
Yes, thank you. And I am seeing that we're having some issues with the participant guide. Hold on, I'll share it here in a moment, then I'll work on making it just open for everybody.
And I'll go ahead and throw the questions in the chat. Sometimes we talk a little fast, so you know sort of what you're writing about right this second.
Now everyone has it many ways.
And for those of you who are just now joining us, we're asking people to reflect on the questions that are on the screen right here. What are you already doing in relation to this principle in your course or program? And what would you like to be doing or doing more effectively in relation to this principle? And what are some initial actions that can jumpstart that work?
I realized I was muted. We'll just take just a couple more minutes before breaking into smaller groups. All right. Cindy, did you want to go ahead and now go ahead and put folks into the small groups?
Yeah, so they're all set. And so basically what we're going to do next, now that everyone's had some individual reflection thinking about your engagement with sort of anti-racist community engagement principles in your own work, we're going to ask you to share out in small groups. Because we're such a large group in our workshop, we can't have like every individual share out, but we will move back to a part after these small groups where we're going to do report backs based off your discussions. And so I'm gonna open up the rooms and you guys can go and jump in.
All right. I think everyone's back. All right. We have many people and many rooms, so I only got to share it and listen in and on a couple of them, but there were wonderful conversations and very different conversations in them both. And Cindy, I'm assuming you had the same experience. So yeah, I guess we'd love to take some time. About 10 minutes would be plenty, but we got lots of folks who are only going to be able to get to a few. I guess raise your hand or just unmute and share for those who want to share about some of the sort of questions, insights, conversations that you had in your smaller groups.
I think one of the things that came out in our conversation, hi, I'm Annie Armstrong from Worcester State University, is it's difficult when you go to a new place. It always takes time to figure out where your students are at. So, and what who your partners are. And it's hard to, it's like, it's not a short process. You can't just do it in a semester. It always takes longer.
We said the same thing in my group, that that sometimes you have these workshops for 90 minutes, or sometimes you have it for a whole semester, and you don't feel like you've gotten really to the students so that they understand what you're saying, as well as creating some type of reader's guide so that people who are reading or joining in these book clubs will, I don't want to say, they'll make better informed comments about the book. And then the last thing was that sometimes it feels like we're preaching to the choir, because people who are doing the work and people who are doing these type of classes, we're usually talking to each other as opposed to finding people in the community. So I'll use myself as an example. We're working on a cultural competency for our internal staff. And the people who will respond, I shouldn't say the people, my thoughts are the people who will respond to it are those who've been exposed to this type of thing, whereas some of the long-term employees may not be as open to doing that.
That's a great point. Who else would like to share out? I see we're having also a good conversation over in the chat right now about language justice, having.
And so, yeah, if I can sort of share what I heard over in that conversation, and if we're not taking into account for and it's right, we talk about languages here, but for example, the example was of Southern California, and there, if we're not taking advantage or account of the different languages that are spoken, so in this case, for the most part, it's going to be Spanish, right? Then it's not right. It's not accessible. You're not able to do that, and so really taking that into account.
Yeah, Carrie.
Yeah, I'll just add too, because I think sometimes the dialogue is like, okay, well, you have to do this thing because it's like, I mean, I think it's good to use these practices, and I like, for me, running research team meetings or collaborator meetings in Spanish is like not a thing I've had the chance to do before. And I will say, like, I had a number of students that were just really grateful that all of a sudden their classroom centered something different, like, a dual math and Hispanic studies major that is now asking if they can do their thesis with me, because this is the first time that they've seen how math and Hispanic studies can blend together. And so I also think there's something like really empowering for students when we start implementing those practices in our classrooms, that makes it like even easier to sell, even though it sounds hard for students to readjust their brains.
Yeah, Ty?
Our conversation was brilliant in our room, but I didn't actually bring this up. But one of the things that I run into in the environment that I'm in is actually the community organizations having the savior complex. And so that's something that I'm working with my students with, and I need to get better at, is preparing them to actually be able to help the community organization in starting to recognize that maybe they shouldn't just plan to go do bike programs in an Indigenous community. Maybe they should talk to the Indigenous community. And that is some of the toughest conversations that like these students are having to have, because it's not about them, it's about like, we want to help you with this project, but there's some concerns.
I find that some of the hardest work, because a lot of times in academia or higher ed, we hear about student-centered models. And I feel like half the battle in my community engaged work is decentering the student and reminding students that the world doesn't always revolve around them. And especially when we're working with community partners, it's really about centering the community and centering the community needs. And some, especially students of privilege, they have a hard time, I think, grappling with that, as well as working with our students of color and amplifying their voices and their cultural wealth and knowledge, that we can also blend those with the community needs and identities where appropriate, and not marginalizing or tokenizing those students as well. So it's that really difficult balance, right?
I'm seeing a message in the chat from Andrea Canoe about faculty having community organizations directly contradict readings and discussions they've had in class. And I can see that as, really off-putting for the faculty member, or I could see that as an opportunity to open up a line of inquiry and to have dialogue with those community people about, help me understand how it is that you see this differently from the way my reading presents it. And Andrea, I'm wondering which of those directions or some other direction stuff that you're talking about went.
Yeah, it's interesting because that just happened this semester, and I just facilitated a conversation with the class about a week ago at the faculty member's request, trying to sort of reconcile some of these things with the students, because the faculty member felt that discussion directly undermined her as an expert in the classroom, and she felt that the students no longer trusted her, or they felt that her point of view was part of some agenda. And she had spent so much time in the beginning of the class talking about how the community partners they were going to encounter were the experts, right? And so really laying this important groundwork for anti-racist community engagement, and then going into a setting where the community partner was really using a lot of language about charity approaches to the work that they were doing. And she was really trying to get her students to think much more structurally about the issues that they were going to be encountering in the community. And for all of the when I went in to meet with the students, I applauded them for paying enough attention to notice that there was a contradiction. And then, we proceeded to have, this discussion about how our community that we live in is not a monolith. And, we need to think about the different perspectives that people are bringing in, the different narratives that folks are hearing, different political environments that exist in our state and in our city. And so it was a great conversation, but I don't blame the faculty member who is also a younger pre-tenure female faculty member for being really nervous about feeling undermined in her classroom. And so it was tricky. And time will tell, when course evaluations roll around, how the students actually felt about it.
Yeah, thank you. Alexis, yeah, I see your hand up. And you're muted.
Sorry, I turned off the wrong thing. So I'll just maybe build on that, where, something that I've, through my scholarship, but also in the center that I'm running, we're really grappling with, what do we mean by community partner? Because I think traditionally that's been primarily fully formed 501c3 nonprofits or government agencies. And sometimes those organizations aren't actually representative of the community that they're trying to serve. And so I think it's really important to notice that, but also to notice which community organizations your faculty and others are leaning towards, which often tend to be larger white-led nonprofits. So we're just beginning to grapple with that. And also we had a tiered approach, and I was like, that's really inequitable. We're not doing that anymore. So we're exploring how to work with partners in a way where they don't feel like there's a hierarchy.
Yeah, I'll just say from my own work in equitable community engagement, that's really hard to do, especially when you're bringing in multiple entities and you're trying to create a level playing field between college students and faculty and community partners and community residents, especially if the community organization isn't representative of the community. Like, how do you balance all the different needs and perspectives and identities and assets that everyone brings to the table, but they're doing it from a different agenda. They've got a different stake in the game. While we all might share the same goal or we're driving towards the same outcome, we're doing it for different reasons for sure. So that's definitely difficult. Although I see we have about 5 minutes left. Do we want one more comment or?
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's do one more, maybe one more comment or question, and then we'll wrap it up. And I find that sometimes asking for one more is a good way to stop it. All right, maybe not. All right, and I do want to say just real quick, when we were developing the principles and we had a number of discussions and interviews with community partners, that was one of the things that they brought up, right? Is that not every community partner is working towards kind of the same goals, or the same aims, or in the same way, right? So you can't approach sort of a community partner whose goal is volunteerism with which is doing sort of the anti-racist work, and so just being very, very intentional about what to expect from them as well.
I did also find it interesting in those focus groups that our community partners were struggling with the same conversation that we're having with our students, that they were like, how do I get my staff to buy into ideas of anti-racism within our organizational goal and mission? And so we were kind of all in the same boat of, we would like to do this better, when more equitably and in an anti-racist way. How do we do that in our own different spheres? So I think that's a good thing to sort of keep in mind, that not every community partner is on the same page as you for sure. And fleshing that out well before you engage in a partnership or an initiative together would probably be best for sure. Okay, so we have about 3 minutes left. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, for going along our crazy whirlwind of breakout rooms and individual reflections and talking to strangers, which is always uncomfortable. We really hope that you guys found this valuable for your time, and that you have something that you can take away with you today and apply on your campuses and your contexts. I'm going to throw a couple of links in the chat. Again, that link to our book, if you don't have a copy, please go and grab one, but also to our digital companion that's housed on Campus Compact's website that has additional resources and information around anti-racist community engagement. And we hope you find that to be useful. As well as, again, the link to our 4 principles, in addition to the third one that we're just focusing on today. I'm actually really glad John Reif is here today, who is one of our co-editors, because I think I'm going to butcher this, so I'm going to actually pass the mic to you. We have 2 more anti-racist community engagement anti-racist community engagement events coming up through Campus Compact. John, will you please fill us in on the title and dates?
Yes, and I'm looking for my calendar to make sure I get it correct. Because I
John,
don't
can I
trust
jump in
that.
real quick as you find that? So one of the questions that came up in one of the breakout rooms was,
Yeah.
we're facing this enormity of anti-DEI legislation and all sorts of things that are hampering this work. And so there was a request, can Campus Compact perhaps have updates on the status of this legislation, where it's happening and where it is in sort of live time? So that's a request while Nicole, while you're here in the room. So if you can sort of pass that along, and perhaps that would be a helpful resource, I think, for us.
Okay, I just put into the chat, it's April 18th at 3 o'clock Eastern time. We will be the editors for, actually, it's me, one of the editors for Section 4, which focuses on Section 3 focused on course design. Section 4 focuses on building a compassionate and inclusive classroom environment. So how do we manage what we do if we are a faculty member with a class? How do we manage what we do with our students in a way that is aligned with an anti-racist commitment? And we have a couple of authors who will be talking about one of the chapters in Section 4. Deborah Keish and Maurice Powell, a faculty member and a student. The chapter is Doing the Work, and Maurice and another student who's a co-author talk in that chapter about how they found themselves, figured out that facilitating conversations with community partners and students on the campus together was doing the work of anti-racism. They'll be sharing that. And then in May, we will be hosting a workshop similar to this one that will focus on using Principle 4 about creating a compassionate classroom. And what do you do and what would you like to do? And we'll have a similar kind of conversation with the folks who show up then. I hope it'll be a bunch of you.
All right, we are out of time. So thank you again, everyone, for your time and for attending today. We hope you found this helpful.
All right, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you in conversation soon.